2025 indicative allocations are out.
What the consequences of these caps can be.
For I think about 200, 250 new scholars for the new Colombo Plan program.
Investors are now looking towards Perth, which is great.
Some impact on the Tuition Protection Service. This is an interesting one. G'day, I'm Rob Malicki, coming to you today from Gadigal Land in Sydney.
And g'day, I'm Dirk Mulder, coming to you from Darug Country, very wet Darug Country in the west of Sydney.
Yeah, Dirk, we had to delay our recording this morning because of a seasonal thunderstorm coming over and dumping a heck of a lot of rain on both of us.
You got to love summer storms in Sydney, hey?
What I do like is that you're now an hour west from where I am, so you text me when big thunderstorms are coming up top of you, and I basically get an hour notice to move my car undercover.
Pretty much. Yeah, it's been pretty crazy, actually. For those tuning in, I actually just sent Rob a photo of my newly established office, which has water right up to the door. So it's been an interesting few hours here in the west.
I would call that either good luck or good planning, Dirk, one of the two.
Let's go with good planning, eh? Let's go with good planning.
So for today, we're doing something a little bit different on the podcast. We just want to give a try, like basically just running through the headlines. So keeping this episode nice and tight, basically the top sort of handful of articles, handful of things going on out there in international ed land for listeners. So this is just a little experiment. So are you ready to go, Dirk? So I'm just going to throw you some headlines and you just give us 30 seconds on what the story is. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay, awesome. So 2025 indicative allocations are out.
They are, yeah. So this is a story by Tracy Harris. Essentially, if you remember back to the failed ESOS Act and the caps that were brought in, there were some allocations that were sent out amongst people, and they came out by being tabled in Parliament. That's how they kind of became public. What Tracy's done is actually looked at what the indicative allocations are for this year, aka the ones that are set now versus the ones that were sent out earlier. There's some slight variations in that. So you can have a look, have a read through the article and see that. But as always, some great analysis there from Tracy.
Super interesting. That's definitely worth digging into. On to Western Sydney, where you are, and future quality of healthcare potentially impacting student cap.
This is a really interesting story. I'll probably case it a little bit differently. There are examples, and I think one of the things that we've spoken about previously was just how good the Vice-Chancellor of Western Sydney has been in explaining what can be. And it's something that I've certainly picked up on. He does it again just this week with a speech, I believe, to the City Institute, where he talks about the outcomes in healthcare being affected, aka the amount of graduates in the nursing field to hit the nail on the head. What I really like about this is I think there are other vice-chancellors now starting to cotton on with similar stories. So to use one as an example, and one that I've been speaking about, Scott Bowman up in Charles Darwin recently wrote to all of his staff about the impacts to the new city campus that will be coming on and to Capital Works because of these student caps. I'm hoping they'll be able to explore that a little bit more over the next week, Koala readers. But again, those tangible examples as to where the caps may be affecting, universities and their communities, probably more so, is a really, really important issue over the next couple of months prior to the election.
I've got to say, George Williams, in such a short time, has gone right to the top of the list of people that I'm listening closely to. Obviously very wide into his community and talking a lot of common sense. Loving it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so moving on sort of a little bit sideways from this, but similar. So migration policies and their impact on international student demand.
Yeah, absolutely. So Andrew Norton published a piece on LinkedIn. So Andrew's done a bit of writing for the Koala over the times, which has been great. I got in touch with Andrew and said, mate, is there any chance you'd be happy for me to republish this? And he said, you know what, let me cut it back and kind of give you the executive summary. So Andrew's popped that up. Again, great story. He goes back into the demand. So he looks at applications, visa application data, and clearly things have come off. But again, in line with what we're looking at over a migration downturn, according to the targets that were set by government, we're probably still a ways off. So again, get into the data, read the article. Andrew Norton, one of the most prolific kind of commentators on higher education, again, nails it in terms of his analysis. He also will be putting out some work on visa issuances as opposed to applications, and that work will be coming out shortly. So I'll be watching that one closely as well.
Mate, just a little sidebar. Gee, you get the best people writing for the Koala. It's amazing. Like, so good.
Going back to, I guess, our chat that we had in Melbourne, that is a purposeful thing. We want to try and get the best people out there in the sector to be talking about the issues. So again, the Koala tries to invite as many guest commentators along as possible. And we've been, I've been really fortunate to be able to have the likes of Andrew Norton and others come and give guest spots on the Koala.
Sensational. Moving west, as in not Western Sydney, but much further west to Perth. And there's a lot of investment going on in student accommodation happening.
Yeah, mate, there is. Coming from Perth, I probably know this a little bit sort of better than them most. But essentially, the city of Perth is looking at rejuvenating, and there's a whole sort of building thing going on. And a lot of it is centered around the new ECU city campus. So if you think Perth is currently the only city in Australia not to have a city-based campus, you could argue UWA is in the city, but it's actually in the city of Nedlands, and it's kind of, you still have to get a taxi to get there. It's, it's not walkable. But you think about Brisbane, you've got QUT, and you've got a number of, JCU, and you've got a number of universities that are downtown. Sydney clearly, Melbourne clearly, with RMIT and others, and Melbourne within walking distance of the city. Adelaide obviously has 2, maybe 3 universities now that are along the terrace. So Perth really is the outlier here in terms of not having something in the city. So what's come of that is, with every university being based in the suburbs, PBSA accommodation, or student-facing or student-based accommodation, hasn't necessarily been a big one. So if you think of UWA, there's lots of halls of residence, which is great. ECU, Murdoch have gone out with private providers to run their own accommodations. Curtin's invested quite well, but again, they're all suburbs-based. So what we're seeing now is an influx of investment in PBSA accommodation off the back of this ECU city build, as well as then I guess I don't want to use the word regentrification, but certainly a purposeful strategy to have students at the heart of Perth City. So it's really, really interesting that investors are now looking towards Perth, which is great.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. And then the last one for our list of headlines for today, some impact on the Tuition Protection Service. This is an interesting one.
Yeah, it sure is. So look, I've had a number of people contact me about, I guess, just to sum it up, basically the pace in which, if we think of the International House Sydney closed, I want to say it was early December, and we're now, the 10th of February, and there are still students waiting for information to be placed, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there was obviously some negotiations around moving some of those students to a single provider, but that's not necessarily possible in a lot of the locations that IH Sydney Training Services were located. So we've got, I've heard of students up and down the East Coast that have been looking for alternative options. They haven't been able to find them because the TPS database hasn't been updated, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a number of providers and a number of students that are essentially getting a little bit frustrated with the pace in which this is all being wrapped up. And given the fact that we've got, probably a hard 12 months ahead of us, and many in the sector believe that this will be the first of many, or maybe not many, but the first of a number of closures potentially. This is a real litmus test, and we need to make sure we get these systems right so we can get them out the door really, really quickly and make sure that students are looked after, and that safety net that is the TPS works effectively, and we're not waiting months for reallocations. It should be a matter of a couple of weeks.
Fantastic, mate. A couple of short ones from me. The New Colombo Plan has formally awarded its scholarships for 2025. So it was a function held down in Canberra for, I think, about 250 new scholars for the New Colombo Plan program. Of course, we've talked extensively about that on the podcast. And speaking of podcasts, I just want to flag an episode that I dropped last week, Mr. Mulder, which was you and me. The man behind the headlines is what I put as the title for that piece of work. You and I had an awesome chat down at Melbourne, and you shared some very good stories, like not from just your career, but your travels and the like. And I'd just like to flag that for people tuning in as like a must-listen episode. I really enjoyed that recording.
Mate, you're too kind. I really enjoyed the chat too. Ironically, for those listening, the idea, Rob actually bought a whole bunch of brand new equipment for AIEC, and we're actually sitting up in our apartment, which we shared in Melbourne, and the whole idea was just to test the equipment. But mate, we soon got chatting away, and it's really interesting, I guess, from someone who doesn't necessarily talk about themselves but talk about the news to get into a discussion like that. And mate, testament to your ability to pull out a story as well. I think it came out okay. I'm not one to necessarily look at me being involved in these. I cringe a lot when I hear myself back, but it was it worked out all right. I fully appreciate it.
Of course, mate. So jump on and have a listen to that episode if you haven't yet done so. And actually, just flagging as well, this week I'm dropping a new profile episode with Jane Den Hollander, former Vice Chancellor.
That's one you don't want to miss, I reckon.
That was absolutely an amazing conversation for me. One of my true leadership heroes, and she's as good talking in person as all of the stuff I've read. So that one will be out this coming Friday. I think that's it, Dirk. We've cracked that in under 11 minutes. I reckon that's a pretty good effort.
Absolutely. Mate, this might be the start of something new.
I hope so. So regular news episode back in about 2 weeks' time. And in the interim, there are those awesome episodes with Dirk and Jane already up on the podcast. And we will see you next time on Global Horizons. See you next time, Dirk.
Thanks, Rob.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Global Horizons podcast, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Search for Global Horizons podcast and then just pop in your email address. And that way you will never miss out on all of the critical international education news that you need to stay up to date with. This episode has been produced on Garrigal Land in Sydney. Our video and audio editor is Len Zamora. and I'm your host, Rob Malicki. Have an awesome day. See you in the next episode.